If you can teach people to stand up in the face of the things they're afraid of, they get stronger. And you don't know what the upper limits to that are.
I was coming to the world with my hand out, and as long as I was coming to the world with my hand out, I was at the mercy of other people. And if I wanted to take control, I was going to have to get control of the resources.
The same level of thinking that's created your problem will not solve your problem. And it made me ask another question again. What's my problem?
So if your life isn't everything it could be, you could ask yourself, well, what would happen if you just stopped wasting the opportunities that are in front of you? You'd be who knows how much more efficient, 10 times more efficient, 20 times more efficient. That's the Pareto distribution. You have no idea how efficient people get. It's off the charts. Well, and if we all got our act together collectively and stopped making things worse, because that's another thing people do all the time. Not only do they not do what they should to make things better, they actively attempt to make things worse because they're spiteful or resentful or arrogant or deceitful or homicidal or genocidal or all of those things all bundled together in an absolutely pathological package. If people stopped really trying just to make things worse, we have no idea how much better they would get just because of that. So there's this weird dynamic that's part of the existential system of ideas between human vulnerability, social judgment, both of which are major causes of suffering, and the failure of individuals to adopt the responsibility that they know they should adopt. You know, if you take people, and I've told you this, and you expose them voluntarily to things that they are avoiding and are afraid of, you know, that they know they need to overcome in order to meet their goals, their self-defined goals. If you can teach people to stand up in the face of the things they're afraid of, they get stronger. And you don't know what the upper limits to that are, because you might ask yourself, like, if for 10 years, if you didn't avoid doing what you knew you needed to do, by your own definitions, right, within the value structure that you've created, to the degree that you've done that, what would you be like? Well, you know, there are remarkable people who come into the world from time to time, and there are people who do find out over decades-long periods what they could be like if they were who they were, if they spoke their being forward. And they get stronger and stronger and stronger, and we don't know the limits to that. We do not know the limits to that. And so you could say, well, in part, perhaps the reason that you're suffering unbearably can be left at your feet, because you're not everything you could be, and you know it. And of course, that's a terrible thing to admit, and it's a terrible thing to consider, but there's real promise in it, right? Because it means that perhaps there's another way that you could look at the world, and another way that you could act in the world, so what it would reflect back to you would be much better than what it reflects back to you now. So you might say, well, what would happen if you abided by your conscience for 5 years or for 10 years? What sort of position might you be in? What sort of family might you have? What sort of relationship might you be able to forge? And you could be bloody sure that a relationship that's forged on the basis of who you actually are is going to be a lot stronger and more welcome than one that's forged on the basis of who you aren't. And it's a great basis upon which to bring children into the world, for example, because you can have an actual relationship with them instead of torturing them half to death, which is what happens in a tremendously large minority of cases. Because it isn't merely that your fate depends on whether or not you get your act together and to what degree you decide that you're going to live out your own genuine being. It isn't only your fate, it's the fate of everyone that you're networked with. And so, you know, you think, well, there's 7 billion people in the world, and who are you? You're just one little dust mote among that 7 billion, and so it really doesn't matter what you do or don't do, but that's simply not the case. It's the wrong model, because you're at the center of a network. You're a node in a network. Of course, that's even more true now that we have social media. You'll know 1,000 people, at least over the course of your life. And they'll know 1,000 people each, and that puts you one person away from 1 million, and 2 persons away from 1 billion. And so that's how you're connected, and the things you do, they're like dropping a stone in a pond. The ripples move outward, and they affect things in ways that you can't fully comprehend, and it means that the things that you do and that you don't do are far more important than you think.
used to be 60 pounds heavier, and I grew up in a morbidly obese family, and I really wanted to escape that fate, but I couldn't see any way to do it. All that I had was this crushing sense of being adrift at sea and not knowing how to get back to shore. I could see the failure. I could see that I had no plan, that I no longer knew how I was going to get where I wanted to go. And I didn't believe that those were things that I could change about myself. They felt like a prison sentence, or if I'm honest, it felt like a death sentence. And it was coming to the realization that I wasn't talented that really forced me to look for a new mindset that would allow me to escape depression, because I was coming to the world with my hand out. And as long as I was coming to the world with my hand out, I was at the mercy of other people. And if I wanted to take control, I was going to have to get control of the resources. And in that was a desire to find another way to think about it, another way to think about myself, another way to think about talent, another way literally to think about everything. And I remember saying to myself, listen, pussy, stop asking yourself what the least you need to do is and start asking yourself how much you can bear. I began to develop a growth mindset. I needed to believe that by working really hard, that I could get better at anything. And if that were true, then I just needed to buckle down. I needed to practice. I needed to get good. I needed to do the reps. I needed to put in the effort. I needed to be willing to break myself in half to get so good that people couldn't ignore me. The way to do that? Act. That's it. You need to get out there and do something. Right now, today, literally, stop this fucking video, and whatever it is, if you already have a passion, you are so much farther ahead than the vast majority of humankind. If you know what that thing is, get out and act. And by the way, if you don't know what it is, act. That's the only way that you're gonna find out. Go encounter stuff, go try things. It is in the process of action that you're gonna learn the things you need to learn. But if you've been thinking about starting a business, fucking start it. Like, actually build the product right now today. You will learn more, infinitely more, in the process of trying to create it and make it real than you ever will by watching videos, by thinking, by meditating on it, by taking notes. None of it compares. It's not even in the same universe as just going and doing it. One step is better than 100 hours of pontification. Running 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction is better than standing still. You'll learn something. So get rid of this notion that you're gonna end the day with a perfect record. You're gonna fail, you're gonna fuck up, you're gonna try 1,000 things, and 999 of them are not gonna work. But whatever you want, literally don't ask yourself who you are today. Ask only, who do you want to become? And then are you willing to pay the price to get there? Like, people are convinced that they shouldn't act until they have it all figured out. Fuck that. You should act right now today, no matter how chaotic your vision, no matter how chaotic your life, no matter how much you have going on already. You're working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, doesn't matter. Take an action today or you never will.
A lot of people don't know that I had a brain injury when I was a child. One day at school, somebody says, hey, look at all the fire engines outside. And most of the kids in the class never saw a fire engine, and firefighters are like my heroes. I want to see it. I take my chair and I carry it to the windowsill, I put it down here, and I climb on it, and I could just kind of see the outline of it, and I see the firefighters, and I'm on my bliss. And just when I had that highest moment, one of the other kids is grabbing my chair. And I go back to turn like this to see who's doing it, and I fall head first right into the radiator, and I was bleeding, everywhere. There was a pool of blood. And my parents, the way they describe it, it was very traumatic. They said that I was never the same, and especially when it came to learning. I mean, I became painfully shy, I wasn't myself, and where it really showed up was in school, because I didn't understand things very well. And teachers would have to repeat themselves over and over and over. I became so introverted and not talking to anybody. And the big thing was, like, also I couldn't read. I would just look at pages and I just see letters and they didn't mean anything to me. We would get in circles and the teacher would give a book out, and one by one you would have to read out loud to the other students. And my heart's beating out of my chest right now even thinking of it, because every time somebody finished, it would get closer, the book would get closer and closer and closer to me. And I would just, because I couldn't read. And then when the book got to me, I just didn't know what to do. And I would just stare at it and I would just start crying. The teacher would come and take the book and then pass it on to the next person. And I remember my teacher pointing to me, talking to another adult, saying, that's the boy with the broken brain. And I always thought, it really pushed something deep inside of me, saying that I'm not enough. There's something that was wrong with me, that I wasn't like everybody else, that I couldn't be like them. And it took me actually an extra 3 years to learn how to read. I taught myself by reading comic books when my parents thought I was sleeping. I would be under the covers with my flashlight every night looking at the pictures. My favorite comic books growing up were the X-Men. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest, it's just they didn't fit in because they were mutants and they were bullied like I was bullied, and they were pushed aside and told that they weren't worth anything. It was a metaphor for me of like what people were capable of and what humans are, their potential is. At night when I was doing my nighttime reading, I found out that School of the Gifted, Professor X's school for these superheroes, was in Westchester, New York. And that's where I grew up, in the suburbs of New York City. The next day, I got on my bicycle and I started riding around my neighborhood trying to find the school for the X-Men. And I did that consecutive every single weekend. That's what I did. It brought the words to life, and I learned what reading was for me. And so I remember though, we had a parent-teacher conference where my parents came in. I had one chance to really succeed, and it was this book report. They were willing to make this like my book report, to count it more because I was not doing well. And we decided on a topic, and that topic was on Leonardo da Vinci. She thought that it would be interesting, for me to study, to learn about, this genius. They say that he had like dyslexia and he had some learning challenges. And I had this heart-to-heart talk with my parents saying, I know I haven't measured up to this point, but I'm gonna make you proud. And I picked up every single book on Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, I just dreamt about Leonardo, and at breakfast I would read about Leonardo, and everything was about this person. This was like where the spotlight is on you and you have to be able to perform, and this is going to decide if I was something. And that it was more than a book report. And when we get there in class, the teacher said, okay, Jim, I want you to give a presentation in front of the class about it. And my life just, right now, my world just crumbled. Because growing up with learning difficulties, I was painfully shy, because it was like going back to that reading circle again, where I had to talk in front of a group of people, because up to that point, I never did that. And so I looked her right in the eyes, because my heart was beating on my chest, I was sweating so much. And I said, I didn't do the book report, and I basically lied. She just took me for my word, and I got a 0. While I had in my backpack, like bound, this book report, which signified all my dreams, my potential there. I remember to this day walking up, out of the classroom, and there's a trash can right there, and I threw the book report in there. And along with that, everything in terms of my hopes and my abilities, my pride, my promises, it just felt like it just went in the trash. And I still look back with, regret and sorrow that I didn't step up to be able to do that. But I was a product at that moment of my conditioning. I was believing my self-talk that I wasn't enough. Your brain is this supercomputer, and your self-talk is the program it will run. So you have to be very mindful of your thoughts. And so when you grow up with these challenges and you're the boy with the broken brain, you suffer and struggle and you wonder why. At the age of 18, I wanted to run away. I didn't know how to tell my parents how I was going to quit school. And I remember at that time, my friend said, hey, why don't you come with me over the weekend? I'm gonna go visit my family, get some space, get some perspective. And I go to California, and I remember like it was yesterday, the father is walking me around his property and asked me a very innocent question, a question you would ask an 18-year-old kid, but it was the worst question on earth to ask me. How's school? I break down, and I just collapse, and I just start crying to this complete stranger because of all the pressure that I'm holding in. And I tell him my whole story about growing up with learning challenges and difficulties and my brain injury, and I'm gonna disappoint my parents and be a bad role model to my younger brother and my younger sister. And he looked at me and he asked me a question. It's, Jim, why are you in school? What do you wanna be? What do you wanna do? What do you wanna have? What do you wanna share with the world? I didn't have any answers because I've never asked myself that question before. And he pulls out a journal out of his back pocket, and he takes out a couple of sheets of paper, tears them out, and hands them to me with a pen, and he makes me write down my answers. And he looks at me and he says, Jim, you are this close to everything on that list. And he spreads his index fingers about a foot apart. And I'm thinking, there's no way. Give me 10 lifetimes, I'm not gonna crack that list. And he takes his index fingers and he puts them to the side of my head. And between that, obviously is my brain, meaning that's the bridge to everything that I need in life. That's the key to unlock this, to unlock my dream life. And so fast forward, I'm back at school and I'm sitting at my desk and I have a pile of books that I have to read for school and a pile of books that I committed to that I want to read. So what do? I don't eat, I don't sleep, I don't work out, I don't do anything, I don't spend time with friends, I just live in the library. After a while, I end up passing out one night in the library. I fall down a flight of stairs again, I hit my head again, and I wake up in the hospital 2 days later, and I have wasted away. I'm down to 117 pounds. I thought I died. I mean, it was the darkest time in my life because I felt like, what's my value on this planet? But when I woke up in that hospital bed, another part of me woke up saying there has to be a way of fixing this. And as soon as I had that thought, the universe responded. The nurse came in with a mug of tea, and on that mug of tea was a picture of a genius, Albert Einstein, and it had a quote, "The same level of thinking that's created your problem will not solve your problem." And it made me ask another question again. What's my problem? And I said, my problem is I have a very slow brain. I'm a very slow learner. Maybe I could learn how to learn faster. And I was like, okay, where do I go to learn? And I thought, oh, school. And I started looking through all the classes, and I started reading every single one. And I realized all these classes are on what to learn, but there were 0 classes on how to learn. How does my brain work so I could work my brain? How does my memory work so I could work my memory? And I made that my study. And that was my aha moment. A light switch just went on, and I started to understand things for the very first time. I started to have better focus. I started to read faster, and I wasn't getting distracted all of a sudden. I mean, I started to make friends. I started to be more confident and being more happy and having more joy and enjoying myself. And I remember when I had that epiphany, I couldn't help but help other people, because why did I have to suffer and struggle, go through all this difficulty when I could have been taught these easy to learn techniques about how my mind worked, how memory worked? And so I wanted to start helping everybody. That's been my quest for the past 25 years. And I remember recently, I remembered somebody's name in an audience, and that person referred me to the chairman of 20th Century Fox. And I get a call from their office saying, hey, I heard about your work. I want you to please come in and spend a half a day with our executive team. And I go there on a Friday morning, and I give one of the best trainings I've ever done. When I'm done, the chairman of 20th Century Fox comes to me and says, Jim, this was incredible, one of the very best trainings we've ever offered. And I see a movie poster of Wolverine. And it was for a movie, it wasn't coming out for a few months. And I was like, wow, I can't wait to see that film. And the chairman comes to me, he says, Jim, I didn't know you like superheroes. Like, we have another 30 days of filming the new X-Men movie in Montreal. How would you like to go there and be there and just experience it? And I was like, that's incredible. I'd never been on a movie set before. And so he picks me up the next morning, Saturday morning, 8 o'clock. We get on the plane, they call it the X-Jet. Waiting on the plane for me is the entire cast of X-Men. I see Wolverine and Professor X, and I'm sitting between Jennifer Lawrence and Halle Berry, and I get to share some of my brain tips and speed reading and memory tips to these amazing superheroes. And when we get to Montreal, the very first scene took place in Charles Xavier's superhero school. And I'm still this 9-year-old boy, and I'm looking at this school, the place I've always dreamed, that I've always searched and seeked for. And I got to see my superheroes come to life right in front of me. When I go home after that, there's a package waiting for me. And it's the size of maybe a television. And I open it up, and it's this photograph of me and the entire cast of X-Men. There's a note in there from the chairman of Fox. And it says, Jim, thank you so much for sharing your superpowers with all of us. I know you've been looking for your superhero school ever since you were a child. Here's your class photo. What I've learned is this. A lot of people say, oh, I'm not that smart, or how smart am I, or how smart are my kids? They're asking the wrong question. It's not how smart you are, it's how are you smart. A superhero for me is somebody who is on the path of discovering and developing their superpowers, like their strengths, their unique ability, their unique talents. And I feel like the world needs more superheroes, and the world deserves more of us to be able to show up, that there's a superhero version of all of us. Find your superpower.